I've worked with a couple of young lads with high-functioning autism. They're lacking any real confidence in themselves, no confidence in their physicality or the way they can move. It's rewarding for me to work with them for a year and see the difference it makes to them, not only physically, but as a person.
In boxing, it's completely different to any other sport, really, because you do have the biggest highs and biggest lows.
100%. With boxing, if you've lost, you're on the rubbish pile, you're on the rubbish heap. And I think people immediately withdraw support.
Footwork, it's one of the least taught things you'll ever get in any gym. I think it's the most neglected part of the sport.
I think it's because too many coaches are afraid to lose fighters early because the ego of the fighter over-impacts their perception of what they need to do as a coach. Coaches are afraid to say, that's rubbish, you're doing that wrong. I think the whole sport is diluted with people who don't really have any place in it, and that's pretty much just made possible by the fact that social media exists and that they can advertise themselves as whatever they want as a product of that. If you go back 30 years, if you weren't a very good coach, you wouldn't train very good fighters, so your gym would flop, it would fail, so you wouldn't ever get anywhere. Whereas now you can go on Instagram and do whatever you want, make it look like you know what you're doing, and then all of a sudden you get a really busy, popular gym that loads of people want to attend because they think, oh, this guy's good, and then they turn up and realise that you're an absolute charlatan.
Yeah, it's the same with boxers too. You can call yourself a boxer, but if you've not stepped foot in the ring, you're not a boxer.
No.
If you spent 3 years hitting the pads and doing all the sessions, you've still not boxed. You've not had that experience.
Yeah, and also I think that the experience isn't just getting in the ring, it's the experience of training properly, training with a fight in mind, not just training to, be fit to be. If you're training for a fight, it's a very different experience to just being in the boxing gym, training to learn boxing. Because,
what experiences, for people that are listening, what experiences would you say are different with that?
Well, weight management is one thing. That's a very, very different process. It makes the whole thing different. The recovery setup, the programming of your training, like a decent coach will, when they know you have a fight, they'll have your training programmed specifically to work, sparring at certain times, strength and conditioning, have your runs all booked in, all planned out, whether they're doing pad work or bag work, it's more down to the fine details at that point. It's not just turning up, getting a session in, joining in and seeing what you can do kind of thing. It's about actually training with intent as opposed to just training for the sake of training, And I think that's what a lot of people miss. If you have a young fighter come in that has boxed before and they're experienced and they understand the process of getting ready for a fight, and it's a different experience to have a young guy who comes in who's been in loads of boxing gyms but they've never fought, and then all of a sudden they get confused because you're saying, now today's just pad work and heavy bag, and then tomorrow we're just sparring, you've got 10 rounds with blah blah blah, and it's it forces them to kind of look at it a little bit differently, and I think that's where so many of the kind of charlatans and stuff fall short, because they don't understand the process behind what they're doing. They don't understand why they're doing any of the things they're doing. They're just doing it because it's what they've seen on Instagram.
Yeah, exactly. And you need to teach. You need to be able to have that time. Do you find it hard with your clients to give them that amount of time for them to grow? Or do you make it around, for example, you wouldn't match them for a fight until you feel they're ready? Do you make sure the time frame's right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't put any sort of time pressure on any of it. I think there's a couple of people that I've worked with who have boxed in a relatively short period of time. And then there's others that I work with that I wouldn't even dream of letting box till I've seen certain things from them, And I think...
What things would they be, for example?
I thought you might ask that. One of them is response to being hit. That's an enormous thing. I think a lot of people think that the true skill in boxing is in the skill set. And what the skill that enables you to box is in your skill set. And I mean, I've seen guys that you put them on a punch bag and they look like they're absolute mustard. And you stood there thinking, I'm not sure I want to spar this kid. He looks absolutely fantastic. And they get in the boxing ring and somebody punches them in the face and they fall to pieces. And I think your reaction to being hit and your ability to maintain composure in a fight is an enormous skill, an enormous asset to have. And if you have a kid, for example, that is in the gym training all the time, and they get in the ring and they get hit a couple of times and they're game for it, they bite down on their gum shield and they have a go, well, then you're more inclined to push them further and give them more challenges and bring in different opposition, harder sparring, because you know they've got the mentality and the physical capabilities to deal with that. They're not going to panic. Whereas the opposite is true if somebody gets hit and sort of shies away and turns their head and panics. That's not to say that mindset can't be developed, but then it takes time. And that's kind of what I mean about making sure people get to the right level before letting them box. I think a lot of people get thrown in at the deep end. A lot of gyms will say, you're going to have your first fight. Been training for 6 months. You should be ready to box by now. You're sparring, you're doing this. And I don't think they necessarily give, especially with kids, give them the opportunity to develop the mentality and the mental fortitude that is required to overcome the array of challenges that a fight presents. It's a very different experience to anything. And it doesn't matter even if, for example, if you were sparring England representatives and the sparring went okay and you were doing great. The difference between sparring them guys and the mentality required and then getting out there and fighting somebody of that level, or getting out there and even fighting somebody of your own level is a completely different thing. I'm sure you know the pressure of the crowd, the pressure of the opposition's fans, the pressure of standing in the ring with the lights on, everything around you's dark, and the only person you can see opposite you is somebody who's going to try and take your head off. It's a very different situation to be in, to sparring in a boxing gym with maybe 20 or 30 of your compatriots in there. It's a different situation.
My name is Dennis McCann, professional boxer for Frank Moore and MTK Global. This is Fortress Boxing. A lot more protection, it's a no-brainer around your thumbs, around your knuckles, around my wrist. That's exactly where I have the problems at. They're very compact, so I feel like I'm punching hard with them on as well. And I feel like when you got sparring 14, 16 ounce gloves, the smaller wraps can't really, they're too small for the gloves, that makes sense. So these are a bit bigger and they're getting the gloves a bit more, they're making them more compact.
How can you guide a boxer through, let's say you have an amateur, they have their first fight of you, and you're planning a long-term amateur career, 30 plus fights. How do you mold them during this? Obviously, because they're not going to go in there and they're not going to be perfect. And they're not going to be confident taking the big shots. They're not going to take a punch and come back with two. Like, obviously, they're going to learn those things. What would you do to guide them on that way to help them with the fighting aspect and not the boxing aspect?
I think this is where hard sparring comes into it, and why the kind of modern perception of that you see sometimes with people on social media, and people getting very upset when they see videos of hard sparring. Hard sparring is an absolute necessity in the realm of boxing, because you cannot have no experience of true combat and then expect to be capable of performing in the same manner when you get in the ring. And I think hard sparring needs to be well programmed. It needs to be with the correct opposition. You want it to be as even as possible. You don't want to see your guy out there beating the other guy up. Otherwise, there's no value in that for them. Equally, you don't want to see them getting beaten up. So for me, I would say hard sparring is the primary focus, but it should be 50-50 and programmed into the training so that it's not always hard. So on a Monday, for example, they might just do tech sparring with some guys that are not quite as good as them, and you say to them, look, I want you to focus on this specific skill set. I want you to work on the jab, evading the follow-up punches, and then trying to pick nice steady counters. And then on the Wednesday, you might have somebody come in from another gym for some hard sparring, say 4 to 6 rounds, see how you get on, and then we'll get on the heavy bag afterwards. And then on a Friday, you might say, right, today we're just going to work the jab, just defense. And it has to be progressive, it has to be developmental, and you have to be... I think the key word with everything in training is intent. There's no value in training if it's done without thought. And if you understand why you're doing it, then you can get value from it.
Do you tell the fighters why you're doing the things as well? Or do you maybe, because some might be a bit more nosy and want to know about the plan a bit more, some don't really care, they just turn up?
I prefer people to want to know. because I think if you understand why you're doing something, it's easier to do it. I think that the brain works, not for everyone, as you say, it is different for some people. Some people can just take an action and go, okay, I'm going to do it, fine. And just the pure act of seeing it work will make it viable for them. But there's a lot of people who need the comprehension of why they're doing something, who need to understand the process and what it achieves before they can actually enact it in a combat scenario. And I think it's also beneficial from a boxing IQ, boxing brain perspective to have a deeper understanding of what you're doing and why, because then you can apply it to broader circumstances. So, for example, a catch on a jab. Why am I catching a jab? Okay, we're going to catch the jab at long distance because it means that I'm not sacrificing any space. I can stay there to pick other punches. Okay, so then you can apply that same lesson. So I'm in mid-range now. Why don't I catch the jab? I know why I'm not catching it, because if I catch it here, then the next punch is going to come too quickly and I'm not going to be able to deal with the second shot. So it gives you a better pathway to making the right decisions in other areas as well.
Yeah, definitely. It all makes a lot of sense. In my gym, there's a lot of constant hard sparring, really. There's guys that are a bit heavier than me. They are better than me. And it's just like, we're sparring today, we're sparring today, we're sparring today. So sometimes, but just before my fight that fell through, even leading up to it, I sort of felt like I'd already had my gym wars and I didn't really have the fight going in on the fight week. I know it all fell through, but I did feel like I'd given too much in the gym and it wasn't there. So I am trying to sort of pick and choose when I have my wars leading up to my next fight.
I think the thing with your hard sparring is you probably need to be doing that a couple of weeks, sort of finishing up that sort of intensity and volume a couple of weeks prior to the fight, and then sort of tapering back the volume of it nearer to the fight. So not stopping it, just, if you're going to do that, there's nothing wrong with doing that. I used to do exactly the same thing. I'd be in there sparring every single day. We used to, at my gym at Essex Road in Basingstoke under Trevor Francis, we used to do continuous rounds, so a bit like Mayweather's kind of doghouse vibe. So you would have one guy in there, and then it would just be 3 minutes with another guy, 3 minutes with the next guy, 3 minutes, and you would stay in there for 6 to 8 rounds with 3 or 4 different opponents, and they would all be hard rounds. It was flat out.
Was that in the amateurs? Yeah.
Amateurs, pros, yeah, all the way through, same thing. And then all that happened was you would kind of temper the intensity that you were working at depending on the quality of the opposition you were sparring. But then when it came nearer to a fight, for me, it was sort of the last 3 to 4 weeks. It would be a case of more training specific to what I wanted to achieve in the fight, as in pad work, drills on the heavy bag, all that kind of thing. And then the sparring would be, we've got this guy coming in for 6 rounds. You're going here for 8 rounds. You're going. So then the sparring was, as I said earlier, one kind of day of really good sparring, a couple of days of training, working on what we learned from the sparring, I advocate hard sparring. I think it's a necessity. You can't, if you never swim as fast as you've ever swum, then when you get in there to compete swimming, how are you expecting your brain to know, oh, this is how far I can go? You have to push yourself to the limit before you can figure out where that limit is. Mm-hmm. And otherwise, naturally, by the pure kind of functioning of your mind, you will put that limit way lower than what you would otherwise perceive it to be.
Yeah, and it's not the unknown. Your mentality going into it, where you've already had the hard rounds, and
exactly that.
Like the unknown for a lot of boxers, especially people that are first bouters, you'll see because of that unknown, they do not do anything that they've ever done in the gym. Yeah. They go the complete other way, which, like you're saying, hard sparring could probably help.
Oh, absolutely. And also, it doesn't really matter. I mean, there is a very small percentage of boxers that don't have awful first fights. I think generally as well, for your first fight, you aren't as well conditioned to the process, to the kind of goal of the fight. It's not, when you go in there, your first thought is, I need to beat this guy up. It's not like I'm going to outbox him and win. Because the nerves have got to you, your adrenaline's up, you're pumped, you're like, right, let's just have a scrap, And that's why you see so many amateur debuts that are just too two young kids beating the life out of each other. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just something you need to get away. One of those experiences that you got to take on board, and then after that, you have the opportunity to settle down a little bit.
Yeah. So what got you into coaching? Why did you, because obviously you're still fairly young now, right? How old are you?
32.
32. So what made you choose to go into full-time coaching?
So I boxed since I was 11. I grew up in Australia. I lived in Australia for 6 years in Perth. And then I was very active. Used to do swimming, football, cricket, all sorts of sports. I mean, I was outdoors all the time. And I came back to England, and from 11 years old through to 24, when I stopped fighting, I just boxed. I mean, I was literally, when I say I just boxed, I mean, I used to train 10 to 12 hours a week, every week, from 11 years old all the way through to, and that's just in the boxing club, not taking into account running, strength and conditioning work, just the fitness side of it that we used to do outside of that as well. So then when my boxing career ended and I stopped fighting, I had a little bit of time out of the sport, working on building sites with my father. And I mean, anybody that's ever boxed and anybody that's been in boxing gyms a lot knows that boxing gets in your blood, it gets in your system, and you can't get out of your head. And I spent a lot of time thinking about where I wanted to go. I was already working part-time in my own small gym at the time, just running fitness classes, boxing-based, but fitness classes. And so I already kind of had the foundation to work from. And then in January of 2015, I decided I was just going to take it on board full-time. I started training guys for kind of white-collar bouts, working with a few amateurs alongside that. And then in 2021, 2022, I can't remember. One of those 2 years, I decided to go and get my pro trainer's license with the British Boxing Board of Control and take it a little bit more seriously.
What was the process with the pro license?
Because I was already a prior license holder from my professional fights, it's a little bit different. I basically just had to apply, and my previous license acted as a demonstration that I had a basis in boxing. I believe that's how it works. Mm-hmm. I think you can do the same thing with an amateur record or with an amateur coach's license. I think you basically have to demonstrate that you have some kind of understanding of boxing and experience in it. And then you apply, you go up to, in my case, went to London for an interview, sat down with Robert Smith and grilled me, absolutely grilled me. Like, I sat there, I wasn't aware that I was going to be tested quite as severely as I was. I thought it was just a case of, are you appropriate? Do you have any kind of boxing experience? But he grilled me on a lot of things and kind of gave me a bit of a wake up call about certain things that I should already have known, such as the hand wrapping regulations and what I needed in my bag, real simple things that I kind of had left thinking that I would just learn that on the course. Pass the interview, get through that, and then you have to do a 2-day or a day and a half, 2-day course with 1 day where it's going through all of the rules and regulations, going through your kind of fundamental care process when it comes to a fighter, and then the second day is first aid.
Okay. So in terms of the actual course, how much of it was boxing specific and how much of it was?
Well, they don't teach you it. It's not boxing technique.
Yeah,
there's no lessons.
It's not proving that you're a coach.
No. It's not. They're not asking you to say, right, show me how to jab, show me this. It takes you through the process of training a fighter. So it says, about how you would program your training or your fighters' training for the week, how you would program their strength and conditioning, what sort of different types of training you can do, all the methodologies around that, things like sparring, talks about light sparring, hard sparring, tech sparring, body sparring.
Was this written?
You do a written exam at the end of it, which, to be honest, I felt was probably a little bit too easy. I think it made it a little bit too kind on some of the people there that may not have necessarily put as much effort in as I felt I had. But that will show through when these guys get to coaching people and working with fighters anyway. So there was a written examination. I believe there might have been 2 actually overall, and then another one for the first aid as well.
So when you did this, did you already have your mindset made up of what you wanted to achieve as a career of a coach? And did you already have something planted where you were going to jump straight in?
So I have an interesting story that I always tell people this whenever they ask me about where I saw my life going and how I got to where I am today. And when I was in year 7 at school, my form tutor asked everybody, what do you want to be when you're older? And, you know, some of the other kids said, I want to be a footballer. I want to be an engineer. I want to be whatever. And I said, I'm going to be a boxer. And he said, I didn't say I want to be. I said, I'm going to be a boxer. And he said to me, you can't say that. You don't know that. How do you know you're going to be a boxer? And I said, I absolutely, that's what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a boxer. And we sort of had a bit of an argument about it. And I kind of vehemently fought my corner, and I said, there's no doubt in my mind that's what I'm going to be. You can say whatever you want. He said it was unrealistic, that I needed to pick a career choice that kind of had some sort of academic background. And I fought him on it. And I actually got in trouble, ended up getting a break time detention for the way I spoke to him, because I was a bit upset. But
when you're telling a kid to not go chase their dreams, at someone that's that adamant and persistent at that young,
yeah.
like, how many other schools nowadays would encourage that? I'd say it's probably changed a bit now.
What was interesting was that he didn't say the same thing to the football fans, you know, that would say, oh, I want to be a footballer. I don't know whether it was just his personal perception, whether he thought maybe, you know, there was something different about boxing and he viewed it as a different sport. I'm not sure, but
a lot of people that don't know boxing can see it as just a barbaric fight between two people. And unfortunately, that stigma is just from people that don't understand what happens. And I'm guessing he might be seeing a kid that wants to fight. Maybe he might have saw it as a completely
well, exactly. I think that's what I was just going to add. I think it's that people have it as a perception of a fight rather than an art. You know, it's got a strange kind of external viewpoint where people think of boxing in a different manner to other martial arts. You know, people will look at karate and think, oh, it's so cultured, it's so clever, it's so, you know, you're teaching discipline, you're teaching these cool structured training mechanisms. But the reality of boxing is that it's all of those things and more. Boxing teaches you an immense amount of respect. It teaches kids to be respectful of each other, of their elders, of their betters, of people that are starting out. It teaches you to have self-respect. It teaches you to be confident. It helps you grow. And I think the other thing of where it benefits against other martial arts is that boxing is functional. If I did karate for a year, the chances of me being able to use karate to defend myself if somebody attacked me are immensely low. No disrespect to karate. It's a great martial art. But, you know, you see guys using karate, they've been doing it 25 years, they're probably quite dangerous. But, you know, a kid who's been doing it for a year, it doesn't translate well to an actual fight. Whereas boxing, the minute you've been boxing for even 6 months, 3 months, the minute you've sparred in a boxing ring, you have the ability to process somebody attacking you, which you don't necessarily get in other martial arts. And I think the artistry of boxing, the beauty of boxing, is in the skill sets that surround that, and understanding how to use the movement of other people against them, how to set yourself up, how to move your feet, all of these things. It's just beautiful. It's if you see it done very well, it's poetry in motion. And I don't think that, unless you've had experience of boxing, I don't think you can perceive it that way, because you don't understand the level of complexity and skill that is required to do it at a very good level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of people that it's hard for you to ever watch any sport unless you dabble with it. And I think everyone should bring it back in schools.
Yeah,
you know, if you can maybe try boxing out for 3 months, see what it's like to take a shot, see how hard it is to punch whilst moving your feet. All of the basic things that you learn in boxing, as soon as you see that and you see someone fight on the telly, you're going to have so much more respect for them and you're going to see it in a different light. But where they don't do that and it is sort of enclosed, and there's a lot of boxing gyms that have a stigma where they might be quite inclusive. There are some boxing gyms you go to, and if you don't turn up every single day, you're not part of the team. If you don't want to be world champion or you don't want to be competing, you will not get seen by a coach. So unfortunately, there's a bit of a tension on both sides where it's not open to the general public because there's not many people that will just teach people the basics of boxing for no reason.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got people that actually coach. You're going to want to coach someone into a winning record, and you're going to want to see someone grow from it. So if you're going into schools, maybe it could be different. There's always a solution.
I think
But it's difficult.
From my perspective as a coach, I'm probably something that is going to be detrimental to me in the long run with coaching fighters. I mean, I would hope that I'll find the right person, but from my perspective, I think of myself with more of a customer kind of attitude to the people I train, and I look at a young kid. I mean, I've worked with a couple of young lads that have come into the gym with high functioning autism, with kind of Asperger's and these kind of things, and they're very antisocial. They're incapable of kind of eye contact. You know, they're lacking any real confidence in themselves, no confidence in their physicality or the way they can move. And it's rewarding for me to work with them for a year and see the difference it makes to them, not only physically, but as a person, as it is to train a guy to fight and win a fight. You know, I think, and I think that a lot of boxing gyms, as you say, are end up being overly concerned with the records, with the success ratio, with the win to loss ratio, with the number of champions they train in the gym, and they lose people as they do that. And I think a really good example of that is what Brendan Ingle done at the Winker Bank in Sheffield. You know, obviously he trained an enormous amount of world champions and champions for one man, but it was a cultural thing. You know, he was helping these people to be good people. He was helping them to play a part in the community, to develop themselves as human beings. And I think that's something that I seek to do as well. I have this thing where when people come in the gym, they have to look me in the eye and say hello. And that's kids of all ages. And, you know, I try and shake their hands or, you know, give them a spud or whatever. And I get on at people all the time if they don't. And I'll just keep going until they finally start doing it. And it's amazing the difference it can make in a person to be able to look somebody in the eye and say, oh, hi, how are you? And in your perception of them as a person when they do that, as opposed to when they walk in with their head down and they look stroppy and like they don't know what they're doing or where they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, obviously you learn these skills, you put them into everyday life, and not many kids have that as an opportunity. So that's brilliant that you do that. I was going to ask, what do you think overall makes a great coach? What personalities do you need? What style and methods do you need to really be a successful coach? And
I think that there's a barrier between a good coach and a great coach that's very difficult to go beyond. And I think a lot of people who are considered great coaches don't necessarily deserve to be that. I think you can't be a great coach unless you can form somebody from nothing and turn them into a multi-weight world champion or a world, even just whatever, British champion, world champion. Those are great coaches. Brendan Ingle was a great coach. You know, Emmanuel Stewart, great coach. And I think a lot of what we consider now as great coaches are coaches who basically piggyback off the back of the work of amateur coaches, the work of guys who help develop fighters from nothing, build them to a decent level of skill set, and then they take over, and then all of a sudden, you know, they get the credit, they get the plaudits, and the amateur coaches are forgotten. I think a great coach helps somebody develop as a person. I think it's not just about the fighting perspective. I think they have to help you grow in confidence. They have to help you understand yourself and understand how your personality affects how you box, how your character, how your natural demeanor can affect your fighting, and help you to play off of that to make you a better fighter. I think a great coach is understanding of all of the aspects of fighting. I think they need to understand. I'm not suggesting they should be strength and conditioning specialists per se, but they need to understand the requirements of fitness within the parameters of a boxing match. I think, for me, I think it's important that they have some kind of combat experience, even if that's just sparring, even if that's just working under or being trained by another great coach who they've then learned from. I don't think it's easy to be a great coach if you have absolutely no comprehension of what it's like to get in a ring, because I think the psychological and mental impact of that, stepping through the ropes to fight another person with hundreds of people watching, is almost incomprehensible unless you've done it. And the other thing is empathy and understanding. And I think you have to be, you're being charged with the primary care for that person, and you have to care. If you don't care, then you'll put your ego first and you make bad decisions. You know, we've seen in recent years coaches not stop fights when they absolutely should have. We've seen coaches ignoring fighters' complaints in the corners. We've seen fighters suffering serious injuries because they weren't pulled out of fights sooner. And I think that the ego and pride of a coach has to be tempered and has to be under control at all times.
Mm-hmm. Do you think as well you need to be able to take criticism and sort of be able to adapt and change, you know, not be stuck in your ways?
Not necessarily, because Emmanuel Stewart was very stuck in his ways. He coached a certain way and he had a certain expectation and a certain focus when he worked with every fighter. And it was the same kind of fundamental pattern. Anybody that went to Kronk and trained under Stewart, you could see the difference in the way they trained straight away. I think it's more, again, it comes back to that pride, ego thing. You have to accept and be capable of accepting that something you're doing is wrong. And it doesn't matter whether somebody else is telling you that or whether you have to witness it firsthand. If you're incapable of change, then it is going to detrimentally affect you. But that's not to say that you have to say, I've been told this is wrong, I've been told this is wrong. Because I think you have to be pig-headed to some extent about your own stylistic preferences, about your own expectations of fighters. Because if you don't have a stance, then you don't stand for anything. And if you can easily be diluted by letting the opinions of other people impact what you do. Mm-hmm. And the problem with coaching is the minute your fighter loses, you get blamed. Derek James, Errol Spence lost, Charlo lost. Now Derek James is, retarded. He's an awful coach. He's stupid. He hasn't got a clue what he's talking about. He's just got these guys in good shape.
Last year he was
coach of the year, and everybody was quite literally bending over backwards to be his best friend. And it goes to show you how fickle people are. But in his scenario, and I'm sure he will be, I've got no doubt he will be, you have to be strong enough to say, none of these people know what they're talking about. I know the work we're putting in. I know where I'm coming at this from. So it's easy then that's sort of what I mean by being pig-headed, Mm-hmm. Don't let the criticisms of people who don't have an opinion worth valuing affect the decisions or the manner in which you train people.
Yeah, I heard Lee Wood say before his fight Warrington how he always takes the biggest highs and the biggest lows with a pinch of salt.
Yeah.
And in boxing, it's completely different to any other sport, really, because you do have the biggest highs and biggest lows. If you're a 100-meter sprinter and you come last, that's a shame. I'm going to get back to work. If you've just lost a big fight and a million people have seen you get knocked out, it's very different mentally and emotionally. And there's so many factors that go into just how great you can feel on top of the world after a good spar, even in your gym, and then just how bad you can feel if you get beaten up for a couple of rounds.
Absolutely, 100%. I think the other thing with other sports is, running, if you're the 15th fastest man in the world, even if you come 15th, you're still the 15th fastest man in the world. Swimming, golf, if you're ranked the 4th best golfer in the world, you can come last in a competition, get knocked out on the first day, and you're still going to be in the top 10, whatever. Whereas with boxing, the viewpoint and the standpoint of fans and the industry in general, peculiarly, is very much, if you've lost, you're on the rubbish pile, you're on the rubbish heap. And I think people immediately withdraw support. They'll completely contradict themselves in their opinion of you. A good example of this is Josh Taylor. Josh Taylor, great boxer, lost that fight, and all of a sudden everybody said, oh yeah, Teofimo was back as a pound for pound great, and Josh Taylor was all of a sudden rubbish. Mm. And I don't really buy into that kind of rhetoric. I think it's detrimental to the sport. I think mixed martial arts has a much better viewpoint on losses and losing, And I think as a result, it puts the fighters in a much better headspace. I think losing should affect you if you lose badly. Getting knocked out with a big punch isn't losing badly if you've been doing well up to that point. Getting beat up in a tough 12-round fight isn't losing badly. Losing badly would be being completely outclassed, embarrassed, made to look silly. Then all of a sudden you look at it and you go, okay, they don't belong where they are. That's why that's happened. I think if you lose well, or you are expected to lose and you lose, it shouldn't affect the trajectory of your career. You say, okay, well, he's lost to number 1, but he's still number 3. Let's put him in against number 2. And I think that happens a lot more in mixed martial arts, in the UFC, in the other organizations than it does in boxing. And it's detrimental to the sport because you just don't see as many good fights.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, and a big example there is like Anthony Joshua against Usyk in the rematch. Joshua boxed the best he's ever boxed in his life. He lost, but he put on a great performance. Usyk's just a world-class operator, and he's just better. And like something like that, everyone was like, oh, Joshua's done, he should retire. He's still a top 5 heavyweight. He's still a danger for so many people. He's still, in my opinion, he's got the best resume out of all the heavyweights possibly currently. And
I would say Usyk's is better now, but yes, yeah, I would agree. Prior to the 2 Usyk's fights, yeah, definitely.
And it's just a shame how again people switched on him like that.
Well, I think I sort of disagree with you on the Anthony Joshua thing, not from a fight perspective, but in the manner that he carried himself after that fight. I think that's what lost so many people. I think if he just lost and gone, oh well, the better man's won again, I'll have another fight, everyone would have gone, oh, what a man. But I think the kind of the mental breakdown afterwards made people view it differently and view the loss a little bit differently. Because if you go back to that fight, I think a lot of people in boxing specifically were saying that was a much better performance. There was a lot more success. He looked like a different fighter. He looked a lot more aggressive, a lot more confident. And I think the behaviour afterwards kind of cost him the support of a lot of people. But I agree with you 100%. I think the other thing that people are very loathsome of in boxing is personality. And if anybody has or shows any kind of personality, they are held to a different sort of account than other fighters will be. And I think everybody in boxing likes to see somebody fall. I'm not sure that's necessarily the same in other sports. I think boxing fans are, without doubt, from everything I've ever seen and experienced, the most fickle fans in the world. 1 minute, the guy's the greatest fighter in the world. The next minute,
I do think true boxing fans, that the hardcore fans, let's say 10% of boxing fans, they do appreciate all fighters. They understand one of them's going to lose every time. If they do appreciate if a big fight's made and it's a 50-50, if someone loses, they took on a big risk and they're still top 5. There's still a lot of respect there, but there's so many other voices. And with the impact of social media and other things, everyone's got an opinion. And there's a lot of people that only watch 3 or 4 pay-per-view events a year, and they've got the biggest mouths.
Yeah, that's sort of the thing I was going to say. I think because of social media, what was 10% of a small 100% of boxing fans has now become maybe 1% of a much larger audience who probably 99% of, as you say, only watch 2 or 3 fights a year. They don't follow boxing. They don't know about the fighters. They don't know about the other names and their records, and as with all things in the modern age, they spew and spout the same rhetoric that they hear in the media, or that they hear their favorite fighters saying, and they say it as fact as opposed to opinion or perception. And I think that's the difficult thing, I posted a video about saying after Canelo lost to Bivol, was that the end of Canelo? And I said, I think Canelo probably is in decline, but I don't think that's why he lost that fight. And I don't think that fight can be used as an example of that happening. I think he fought a very good bigger man as a very good smaller man, and he lost the fight. And what you're never really going to be able to see the best of him till he comes back down to a weight where he's more comfortable. And we saw this against Charlo, as when he was the bigger man, he absolutely dominated. And I think a lot of people looked at that and they heard people say, "Oh, he's fallen off. He's past his best," and they just hammered it. He's not even top 5 pound for pound now. And you look at the man's record and you think, what is the basis for that assertion? Like, how could you possibly say that about
He has the
what he's
best
done?
record. He has the
By a mile.
By miles. In boxing right now, as an active fighter, he has the best record.
By miles. Yeah, absolutely. It's unquestionable. Nobody has boxed the same volume of champions. Nobody has boxed as many consecutively. Nobody has boxed a wide array of champions of different weights, of different styles. I personally feel that the variety of styles he's competed against is better than what Floyd competed against in his tenure at the top. I think Canelo has literally boxed every kind of boxing style that you can face, and he's done very well.
Yeah, I was talking to Billy Rumble about Canelo, and I remember just saying, we were talking about how my opinion changed after he said it. A prime example of him, he was losing to like Billy Joe Saunders, was it Kell Brook, I think, was beating him before they get knocked out. Amir Khan was doing well, sorry. Anyway, these fighters are all winning on the scorecards, and then Canelo knocks them out. I was like, yeah, but they were winning. He was like, yeah, but you don't understand. Canelo's got a 12-round fight. He knows what he's doing. He's working them out. It's the same with Gervonta Davis at like lightweight. He's the least amount of punches thrown at lightweight. Yeah. And he's undefeated. But anyway, back to Canelo. He just said he knows what he's doing. He's timing the shots. He's seeing what movements they've got. And he's getting them out of there with whatever it may be. For example, Billy Joe kept bringing his head too low. He was just pretty much rolling, begging for an uppercut. You see Canelo make his adjustments, lands clean, end of the fight, he, throws a towel in. But that just shows how world class he is. And for a boxing fan like me at the time, I was like, yeah, but he was losing, but you're trying to give the other fighter a lot more credit. But for these type of fighters, they know, they're so experienced, they know it doesn't matter. Lomachenko, he gives away the first 4 rounds, but it's fine. He's working them out.
Wasn't fine against Haney or...
I think he beat Haney.
Well, so do I, but I think at the very top, that's what costs him, because the momentum then in the judge's eyes is with the other fighter. And so they don't necessarily see the shift in, yourself, you've been to boxing events. When you sit there and you watch 6 rounds of one guy looking better or having more success, it's very difficult to see when the fight turns until there's something very clear that makes that happen. But back to the other point you were saying about Canelo, I think that's what people miss. Timing and breaking down the other fighter. That's old school. That's what fighters used to do. It wasn't about, especially in the 15-round era. I mean, it was more prevalent then because they didn't need to rush in the first 3 or 4 rounds, so they took their time. When it came down to 12 rounds, if you gave up the first 4, you were kind of on the back foot a little bit too much. But the IQ required to, and confidence required to sit in front of a guy and throw what is essentially a throwaway jab to see what he does, and then defend the next shot that comes back at you and see, okay, he does that. Do it again, see whether he does it again. Do it again, see whether he does it again. See where his head goes, see where his feet goes. And to be doing that in real time. While they're trying to take your head off, or while they're trying to win the fight as well. And while you're losing rounds doing it is exceptional. And anybody that thinks otherwise doesn't understand boxing.
Because you don't realise, especially if you don't know that, watching them with the throwaway jabs, not really landing, losing the rounds, you're like, oh, he's terrible. There's so many factors that go into it. And I want to ask you, do you ever look much into game plans, into fights? Do you ever look at a big fight coming up and think, well, he needs to be doing this and he needs to be doing this, and whoever does that is going to win? Do you ever break it down like that with certain styles? To an extent.
I think I'm of the opinion that game plans in fights lose you fights. I don't think a game plan is the right thing. I think what you have to work towards when you're training is to analyze and assess your opponent's skill sets and find 2 to 3 fundamental flaws, which can either be things they do very well or things they do very badly. Now, that sounds ridiculous to say things they do very well can be a flaw, but Errol Spence, Terence Crawford is the perfect example of this. Errol Spence's entire style was built off the back of one of the best jabs in boxing. And Crawford's team knew they take that away, then he's fundamentally flawed in every other area. And so they worked, as he said after the fight, we worked on that. That was what we were doing in camp. We practiced that. Everything that I did today, we practiced. And I think that's more beneficial than having an overall kind of game plan. And I think that was the real problem people had when facing Floyd Mayweather. I think they said, yeah, we need to do this. This is what we've got to do to beat him. Rather than saying, right, we're going to augment and focus on what I do very well, and then take away a couple of the things that Floyd does very well and see what we can do from there. And if you look at the fighters that had the most success against him, they actually did what they do, rather than trying to adapt their whole style to fight him. Somebody like Miguel Cotto had an exceptional fight against Floyd because he didn't change himself. He just tried to tuck in and worked hard when he was in there, and he landed lots of punches. And it's the same Zab Judah. Zab Judah gave Floyd nightmares for 2 or 3 rounds because he just boxed how he boxed. And it was only when Floyd got to him psychologically that he fell apart, and then Floyd started dominating him. And I think that's always the case. You need to focus on the things that you do very well and make them better, and then pick the things that you can turn into your greatest advantage to beat the other guy. So, taking away a good jab or watching out for the body shot. So preparing to deal with a body shot and counter. Somebody like Ricky Hatton, for example, that would have been something you would focus on, counter the first body shot and then move out, as we saw with Floyd when they boxed. And I think an overall game plan can't exist. If you have an overall game plan, then you're too structured in your thought process. Somebody like Terence Crawford is a great example of why adaptability is such a great skill in boxing, because you need to be able to say, right, it's not quite working like that. How can I change it to make it work? But you need to be able to do that in real time. As we were just saying about Canelo, looking at what the other guy does and then saying, all right, there's the opening, And I wouldn't say he would necessarily have practiced throwing that shot that he hurt Billy Joe with in camp specifically in that way, but they would have looked at that, seen that he reacted in that manner when the straight shots came at him, and thought, okay, we need to look at uppercuts and short hooks here, see what we can do. Mm-hmm. So that would be my view on it, yeah.
Brilliant. And I want to ask, this is completely off topic now. I feel like I was talking to a couple of boys in the gym the other day. Footwork is one of the, obviously your feet, your everything. It's one of the least taught things you'll ever get in any gym. Do you feel like that is the biggest downfall in professional and amateurs when it comes to winning and losing fights? I think personally, footwork, as it being the fundamentals and your base, it's not taught enough. There's only a select few coaches that will really show you ring generalship and how to actually move your feet in the right way, how to handle different things. I think it's the most neglected part of the sport.
I think it's because too many coaches are afraid to lose fighters early. When people come in my gym, the first thing I have them do is stand in front of a mirror, and they don't throw any punches till they can move their feet correctly. And that's just to the left, to the right, forward and back. And then we look at throwing the jab to the left, to the right, forward and back. And then we look at throwing the 1-2 to the left, to the right, forward and back. Then we look at working in circles. Then you do simple partner drills, working around each other. And I do that with 5-year-old kids, and I do that with 25-year-old professional boxers that come and train with me. And when I have somebody come to me and say, oh, I want to do a session with you, and I'm holding the pads, and they might be, it's happened. I've had people come in who are champions, who are very good fighters. They come in and train with me, and I'll say, no, stop. You're moving the wrong foot first. You're crossing your legs over. You're overstepping. You're imbalanced. They say, oh, no one's ever said that to me before. And it's because coaches are afraid to say, that's rubbish. You're doing that wrong. Mm-hmm. Because the ego of the fighter over impacts their perception of what they need to do as a coach. And I think my job as a coach is to make you better. And if you can't move your feet properly, then I'm never going to make anything else better, because you're fundamentally flawed from the outset. And I would actually say, from a perspective of what you're saying about amateur and professional, I would say it's worse in pros. I would say that professional coaches skip steps all the time because as I was saying earlier about the amateur coaches building up the basis of the fighters, and they're working a lot more on the basic fundamentals. Professional coaches who tend to come in at that point will often just work with what they've got rather than change it, and then try and add to that rather than say, okay, you've been making this error for a long time. We need to fix that before we do anything else. And I think that can be a really big issue. I think if you already have a very good fighter, it would be scary for me as the coach to say, they might have won 20 pro fights. It might be scary for me as the coach to say, look, you've won these 20 fights, but you've been doing this wrong the whole time. Mm-hmm. And they'll say, well, how did I win 20 fights? And you say, well, you did win, which is all well and good. But then what happens when you box the next guy that knows that you've been doing that wrong, and then they take that apart and then they knock you out? And then you'll come back to me and you'll say, why didn't we work on that? This is your fault. And I think coaches need to realize that their job is to make sure that the foundational skill set of the fighter is the best that it can possibly be. And if you look at Terence Crawford, if you look at my personal favorite up-and-comer, if you can call him that, Shakur Stevenson, that kid has barely lost a round. He's barely been hit. And the reason is his fundamentals are absolute perfection. His feet are never out of position. His hands are never out of position. His head, never out of position. His jab, always efficient, always perfect, never overdone. And if you can get those fundamentals right, you don't understand that you already have the basis of a very, very good style. Then you add a little bit of character in.
Brilliant. Yeah, that was, you again hit the nail on the head. One thing I would say, Ryan Garcia is a prime example. Obviously, winning fights, great hand speed, all of these good things, but he did have quite a few flaws. Chin's too high, hands too low, basic things that you teach in the amateurs, but it took him to lose against Gervonta Davis to go to another coach. And you see already, just with Derek James, just a few clips, he's got his hands up. He's slowed everything down. There's things that you're seeing Derek James teaching him that I'm learning in the boxing gym. And I guess for a fighter that's been on the world stage, that's a millionaire, that's already had all of that, to strip it all back and drop their ego, I do think some fighters need to take a loss to really understand what they're doing's wrong. Yeah. Like, if you tell them as a coach, look, you're doing this wrong, until they really go through the motions mentally of feeling defeated and going through all of the emotions of a loss, that's when they want to rebuild correctly. I think if you've got someone that's still winning, national champion, but he is doing a few errors, are you going to be able to change him if he's still getting away with it? Probably not. I think losing in boxing can be so valuable. That's why I love mixed martial arts. Like you said earlier, you could have 5 losses on your record, be world champion or be a top 10 fighter, and you'll be loved by everyone. Yeah. And it's just because you're always improving, and it doesn't matter about those losses, because those losses you've learned way more.
Although I would argue that in MMA it is easier to lose because you have more aspects to the sport that you can lose because of. Mm-hmm. So you've got a lot more ready-made excuses. For example, if I am a kickboxer by nature and I've just done a bit of wrestling, if the other guy subs me, then no one goes, that was a surprise. You're awful, you're rubbish. Just go, you need to go and work on your wrestling. And then the next fight you come back, you do a bit of good wrestling, people go, brilliant. Even if you get submitted again, people go, he looked better then. Mm-hmm. In boxing, because it's just hands, I think it's a lot harder to be given those excuses. People will say, I think people are less understanding of why you would lose in boxing than they are in mixed martial arts. And mixed martial arts fans have a better comprehension of that fact that you can lose so easily. Even if you're a great fighter, like Conor McGregor, great fighter, Khabib absolutely destroyed him. For whatever reason. I mean, I'm not an enormous MMA fan, so I don't know a huge amount about it, but for whatever reason, there's obviously a stylistic issue there that clashes and one beat the other. In boxing, I just don't think people understand or take seriously the concept that styles make fights. Mm-hmm. And that is just unavoidable in boxing. There are certain fighters that, it's happened loads of times in history. There's certain fighters that will always be your boogeyman. There's certain styles that will, there is, Roy Jones and Antonio Tarver could have boxed 20 times. And Roy Jones might have pipped 5 or 6 of them. But Tarver would have always landed because he throws unconventional punches from strange angles with an enormous amount of power. And for Roy Jones' style, that had an effect, And I think that doesn't diminish what Roy Jones was capable of, or the fact that he's probably the most naturally talented fighter in history. But equally, you have to say, that's fair enough. That happens, that's the name, and that's the name of the game. That's the name of the sport. And I don't think people do that in boxing. I think people will view a loss and say, he's awful because he's lost. Back to the Ryan Garcia thing, because this is a really, really good point that I wanted to raise there. And that's that everything that you saw happen in the Tank fight happened in all of the other fights too. Just the fighter that was doing it wasn't as good. And that's what the kind of point I was saying to you about the guy who'd won 20 fights. Then in the 21st fight, gets knocked out. And if your coach isn't saying to you, right, sit down with me right now, let's watch that last fight. You won, but look at all this. Look how many times he was close with that overhand right. Amir Khan is the prime example of this. Amir Khan got knocked out with looping overhands every time he got knocked out. And because the focus from a promotional and management perspective was always on the fact that he was the fastest fighter on the planet, he bought into that rhetoric and boxed with that in his mind. I'm so quick, they can't stop me. What he didn't realise was some people were just going to ignore it and punch over the top of it anyway, punch through his punches, and that's exactly what happened. But it didn't happen when he boxed British level. It didn't happen when he boxed, but the signs were there throughout. And anybody that watched him could have seen that happening. And the Bradis-Prescott fight, the exact same thing happened. When Prescott absolutely smashed him, Amir Khan looked brilliant for 20, 30 seconds when he was picking him to pieces. And then Prescott ignored it and threw over the top. And his coaching team at that point, rather than keep being changed as it was, should have said, this is what we need to deal with. This is the problem. You're going too fast. Your head is up in the air. All of your footwork is in straight lines. And that didn't happen till he moved to Freddie Roach. And Freddie Roach obviously had his respect. And so Amir Khan was willing to take that opinion on board and say, all right, I need to move around a bit more. And then obviously he boxed Maidana in the way he did, and it was an exceptional performance, and various other fights. And I think that's the problem. You have to look at fighters, and Ryan Garcia, as you said, prime example of this. He made those same mistakes throughout his career, but it didn't matter because the level of opposition and the advantage of his style meant that he won. And so rather than sit down and watch the footage back and go, this is awful, he's almost hit you 10 times with that left hook to the body. You're letting yourself stay open for way too long to that overhand. He just said, brilliant performance, in his head. Whether his coach said it or not, in his head, he was like, yeah, I smashed him. I did really well. I got a stoppage. And that's not how boxing should work. And that's not how fighters and coaches should be interacting.
Mm-hmm. So when you're dealing with your fighters, obviously the journey's important. There's levels in boxing. You know full well that they need to go through certain tests to build themselves up. How do you look? Do you do the matchmaking as well? Do you have a big part into looking at your fighter, looking at what they can...
If somebody comes to me and says they've got a fight, I tend to prefer 50-50 fights, and that's that. I think
Even in the pros?
I would say so. I think you learn as much about yourself in losing a 50-50 fight as you will in a lot more than winning a comfortable fight against the journeyman. I think my career was sort of... short though it was kind of disappointing in the fact that I would have been far more effective against real fighters who were coming to take my head off, because I'm a boxer mover, counter puncher. I like to think I had very, very good defensive skills, and it's hard to demonstrate that, and it's hard to create openings when the person in front of you is coming just to get through the rounds, and that's what a lot of journeymen do, and that's why those kind of developmental fights should be used as an endurance test and nothing else. I think you box for 4 rounds against a couple of journeymen and then try and find somebody who's on the same level as you. If you win, then you box a couple of journeymen for 6 rounds, and then you find somebody who's on the same level as you, and you keep trying to progress in that way. And then if you take a step back, you get the experience again and you have another go at it. And I think that way you have a more authentic rise and a more authentic group of people at the top of each division, because they would earn their place there. And that's actually what they used to do far more in the old days again as well. That's why a lot of really big names have got losses early in their career. Canelo had a draw early in his career, I think leaving the challenge to your 15th, 16th fight can be detrimental. And I'm not suggesting that you should be matched really hard, by the way. I'm not saying put you in as the underdog, put you in as the 30 to 70%, against the former GB fighter or whatever. I'm just saying there's hundreds of fighters that will be at the level you're at. Try and find one and box them, And there's lots of guys that don't sell tickets, so they're always looking for fights. Take the 50-50 fight, work your nuts off, put yourself in the best shape you can possibly be in, win that fight, and then it catapults you forward again. It gives you better opportunities.
It does happen a lot on the domestic level. There are quite a few 50-50 fights.
Now, yeah.
Like, besides the main event, you'll usually have a co-main or 2 or 3 50-50s. So it is happening more now.
Although what I would argue there is by that point, most of them are already plus 10 fights. And I don't think that's necessarily
like
that
Jordan
beneficial.
Perkis, for example, I think it was his 5th fight. He fought for the Southern area.
Yeah.
And then the English title and stuff. But there is more happening that I've seen in the South.
I think it's only a positive thing. It's going to affect, and like Perkis lost, but it hasn't affected his career trajectory. He lost in a good. That's what I was saying to you earlier about good losses and bad losses. Losing well isn't detrimental to your career. You won't lose fans. You won't lose support from management, from coaches, from. If he'd lost badly, then people are looking and go, oh, maybe he wasn't that good anyway. That's the problem. If you lose well, you go, oh, brilliant fight. What a great performance. I'd love to see him again. And then you get another opportunity. And in that time frame, you work on improving the things that were flawed previously, and then you get better. And I think that's just what more fighters need to do. And I would, from personal experience and from the people I've worked with and the people I know, I would say that it's 99% of the time it's down to the promotion and management as opposed to the fighter. I've never met maybe 1 or 2 professionals that have said, oh, it's a bit early for that fight. Most pros I know go, yeah, I'll take it. I'd love that fight. Yeah, I want to fight that guy. Probably to their detriment, they're saying I want to fight a guy that probably is a bit too good for them. And that's where the coach has got to come in and say, no, look, we're not quite that level, but we are this level. Let's look for that guy.
It was like, did you watch Josh Frankham? Was it last
I did,
weekend?
yeah. Great
What a
fight. Yeah, great fight. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, was it George Davey?
George Davey, exactly.
Unreal. And I think these are the fights, like you're saying, that if you do have a few losses on your record, it is good. And we are getting there. There. I think we're seeing it more than compared to 2 years ago.
I think it needed it. I think that's why. I think this year's been so good for pound guys fighting each other. And I think that's because the management and promotion outfits realised that it was detrimentally affecting viewership, fans coming to see fights. That Josh Frankham, George Davey fight is absolutely fantastic. The level they're both at, the quality of the fight as well, they both laid it all on the line. Great fight. Frankham won. He's going to go up a little bit. Davey's going to have another little reset and then go again. And people, he'll probably hammer his next fight. He'll look fantastic. He'll look better for losing than he would have looked if they hadn't taken that fight. And then as a result, more people will look at him and go, I'm going to watch that guy because I enjoyed watching him last time. So it's just beneficial for the sport, mate. I think people need to fight. And they need to fight more frequently as well. That's something that really bugs me about this day and age. Yeah. Fighting twice a year is an embarrassment.
I really like Tevin Farmer. I think the way he started with his career. What happened
with his time out? I mean, he's only just recently come back, hasn't he?
So yeah, he had a comeback fight last month. Yeah. I don't know the ins and outs, but obviously his story of losing, he wasn't even that good when he first started, but taking it seriously and obviously becoming world champion and whatever else.
And he got shot in the hand, didn't he? Remember that? I think he got shot in the hand and then had a bit of time out and then came back again and boxed a couple of times. I don't know if it was related to that he had to have more time out.
He lives the hood life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, is it Philadelphia he's from?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he lives in quite a rough play. And obviously, again, that's a detriment to a lot of fighters in America. When you have someone that's their personal life, you don't know what's going on. Gervonta Davis going to jail. I know it was okay in the end, but he lives probably a bit of a suspect life sometimes, and it could ruin your career. So.
Well, I think that's the product of the people that they bring along with them. I think the nature of the way they grow up means that they have a sort of a family, a group of people around them that they equate to their family, and by the very nature of that relationship, you bring them people along with you, and it's very hard for those people who are actually not achieving anything other than hanging on to you to change their ways and get out of the habits they get out of, and then by the nature of that, it osmosizes into you and your own behaviors.
But there's also positives to it. Obviously, having that in you, it does make you a better fighter. When you see people that have come from the dirt, it's different to a kid that's been given everything, got a university degree, has had a comfortable life. It's if you were to compare the two and the fight in them and just how they are, it's completely different. So I
think this is a real stat. I might have made this up, but I'm almost certain that I've heard this somewhere, I read this somewhere. I believe that more world champions I think more world champions than anywhere else in history have come from Tijuana in Mexico than any one city in the world of boxing. And that's because you have two choices if you grow up in Tijuana. You're either a drug runner or a drug protector or something to do with drugs, or you box. That's it. You only have two choices. You do one or the other. And the deeply seated desire to get out of that and to get away from that, and the fight that they have to put to stay out of that scenario and to protect themselves from that scenario, like you say, it just puts something inside and that can't be replicated if you've had an easy life. And this is my concern, and actually where I think the fundamental flaws in people like Chris Eubank Jr. and something that I think will be important to watch with Hamid's son, because unbelievably talented fighters, unbelievable skill set, but it's going to be a lot harder when the nitty gritty, when it gets down to a war and there's somebody stood in front of you who's fighting for their life, for their children, for their, as Marvin Hagler said, it's a lot harder to get up and run when you're waking up in silk pajamas. Mm-hmm. And I think if you've woken up in silk pajamas your whole life, you don't necessarily have that need in you. We'll see. I'm not suggesting he hasn't got that. Just that it's
it's a test that they find later on compared to at the start.
Exactly that. And then a lot of the time when they do have that situation occur, when they lose or things go wrong, they then get chucked on the rubbish pile again for the same reasons, and that doesn't seem fair either.
Brilliant. So finishing up, I just want to ask some basic questions.
Cool.
So I just want to cover what would you say makes perfect boxer from a coach's standpoint?
So I prioritize learning in order of good boxing position, basic footwork, an exceptional jab defense, simple combinations, and basic head movement. And I think a great boxer can do all 6 of those things very well. If you have a really good boxing position and you are comfortable in that position and you can maintain it throughout the fight and make the adaptations that are necessary to an opponent's position, situation, and intent. If you have good fundamental footwork, as we said earlier, if the foundations of your style are built on the basis of good feet positioning and good footwork, you're going to be more balanced, you're going to be more responsive, you're going to be faster to react, you're going to have more power, more speed, all of these things. If you have a good jab, you will know this. If you box somebody with a very good jab, it is hell. It is hell, and there's guys that have built careers off the back of an exceptional jab, I mean, Larry Holmes had probably the best jab in heavyweight history, and he didn't really need much else because no one could get inside it. And then jab defense as a byproduct of that. If the importance of the jab is there, then equally you have to be very good at defending the jab. And then simple combinations, all of this complex, crazy pad work that you see people doing. I don't understand the need for it. I don't think it's applicable to boxing. In no scenario is that ever going to play out in exactly the same order it has. I think things should be simple 2s and 3s with head movement, footwork, or hand defense in between, and then head movement. I mean, there is nowhere near enough focus on defense in coaching. There is nowhere near enough focus on the advantages that good head movement can bring to you. And I think if you can balance the previous 5 things with the good head movement, you are well on your way to being a very, very difficult man to beat in a boxing match.
I agree with everything you said, and I think that's why the Americans are better than the English at the moment, because of their range control and good head movement. Yep. I think their defense is so much better than what we offer really here, and what we have is our fundamentals.
Well, this is,
high guard and walk onto it.
High guard, walk forward, try and catch everything on your hands and elbows. The problem that people kind of miss about that, and it's very effective defense, it works, but the difficult thing with that is every impact is felt. It doesn't matter that you're not being hit in the head. If you put your glove on your head and you keep getting hit on that glove, over the course of 12 rounds, it's going to weigh you down. Like your brain isn't made to be rattled around like that. I prioritize defense in terms of the importance of what you are trying to achieve, but the easiest way to defend a punch is to not be there. So that happens with your feet moving. So if you're not trying to land a punch, the first thing you need to do is move away from their punch. If you're trying to land a punch, then your second option needs to be either to aggressively block, which means to take the punch away from impacting you with your hands off your body. Yeah, so off body blocks. And then head movement, because then you're not absorbing any impact. I personally feel that the absolute last option that you should ever take is to absorb the impact with any kind of passive block. If you're not aggressively intercepting the punch and stopping you taking the full impact, that's not to say it won't happen, because it's unavoidable. You're going to have to at some point. You know, Floyd Mayweather, Canelo, they all get hit. But notice how often they try and temper the amount of hits they take, you know, by using the shoulder or by evading a punch or by using their feet. And if you don't do that, it doesn't matter how good your chin is, how fit you are, how resilient you are, eventually you'll get worn down. And that's true of everyone. You can't just absorb impact. You're just asking for a much shorter, less effective career.
Yeah, brilliant. And what would you say are the most important things of boxing training that we're putting you on the spot here, in terms of an order of boxing training methods that we've got? What is the most important down to the least important? If you could just give us maybe 5 from...
Shadowboxing, primary, always. Shadowboxing should always be done. When you're not in the boxing club, you should be shadowboxing. There is no other aspect of your training that gives you the freedom to practice absolutely everything and engage your brain as well as shadowboxing does. You know, I can envisage an opponent and say, right, I'm boxing a tall guy with a good jab. What am I going to do here? You can't do that in any other way unless you're sparring a tall guy. And the difference there is, if you're doing something wrong, you're going to get peppered. Whereas if I'm practicing shadowboxing, I go, oh, that probably wouldn't work. You know, if you engage your imagination properly and you do things with intent, then shadowboxing is invaluable. Second to that, I would say sparring and variations of that, not just hard sparring, but all the variations of that, because you cannot box if you can't do it in front of another person. And as I said earlier, I've seen people shadowbox, hit the bags, hit the pads that look absolute mustard. The minute somebody else has stood in front of them, they fall to pieces and you wouldn't think they'd ever boxed in their life. And the sparring can help you progress much faster than anything else, much faster, because if I'm sparring, I know the things that I do because I've done them in that round. So I say, okay, I can do this. This works. These are the things I need to add to that, subtract from that. And that's how you put together your style. Then I would say heavy bag. Nothing's better for conditioning. No strength and conditioning is better for conditioning than hitting a heavy bag. You're strengthening up your wrists, you're strengthening up your elbows, your shoulders, you're building the endurance, you're adding power to the punches, you're building up the resistance and resilience in your fists. You can work specific drills, you can work conditioning. It's got everything that you can do in boxing to make your boxing better, can be done on a heavy bag. Then I would say pad work, mitt work, probably next. And then outside of that, things like skipping, speed bag, floor to ceiling bag, kind of peripheral skills that will enhance specific elements of your capabilities, like physical attributes like reaction time, hand speed. But you could be on them all day and you won't get any better at boxing just because you can do those 3 things. So that's the way I'd prioritize it. Yep.
Brilliant. Thank you. It's been a pleasure having you on.
My pleasure, mate. I've absolutely loved it.
Have you got any sponsors in your gym or anyone you want to mention?
I'm just going to shout myself out. Follow me everywhere. The Boxing Locker. If you go to any of my pages, you'll see some of the companies I work with. So please find me everywhere. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Threads, YouTube, all the Boxing Locker. Find me everywhere.
Brilliant. Thank you, mate.
All right, cheers for having me on.